Imagine standing at your husband's funeral, the man who loved you more than life itself. You look around, expecting comfort from your family, your parents, your sister, your best friend. But the chairs are empty. They're not at the funeral. They're at a party, celebrating your sister's engagement while you bury the love of your life. That was my reality. But what they didn't know was that their betrayal was about to cost them everything. If you've ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories where justice always finds its way. Because today, you're about to hear how I turned my family's coldest betrayal into the most unforgettable revenge of my life. The day of Daniel's funeral felt like stepping into a world where the colors had been drained away. The church was filled with the heavy perfume of lilies, their sweetness turning cloying in the back of my throat. The wooden pews groaned under the shifting weight of acquaintances, neighbors, and people who had known Daniel through work. Strangers, mostly. Their murmured condolences buzzed around me like gnats, words that couldn't reach past the wall of grief pressing in on my chest. I stood at the front, near the polished mahogany casket that held the man I loved. My hands shook as I gripped the edges of the podium, trying to find balance, trying to find breath. My eyes flickered to the door, again and again, betraying me with hope I didn't want to admit I still had. Because surely, my family would walk in. My parents, my sister, even my best friend. They couldn't possibly leave me to do this alone. But every time the door creaked open, it was someone else. A neighbor I barely knew. One of Daniel's old colleagues. A distant cousin who had never once remembered my birthday. The faces blurred together. The people I needed most never appeared. I cleared my throat, trying to speak, but my voice caught on the first word. The microphone squealed in protest, and my knees nearly buckled. I swallowed hard, tears already sliding down my face. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice cracking. I couldn't look at the crowd. I couldn't look at that coffin. So I focused on my hands, pale, clenched tight, nails biting crescents into my palms. Inside, a storm raged. Where are they? How could they do this? Grief twisted with disbelief, and disbelief curdled into a hot, throbbing anger that pulsed behind my ribs. My heart pounded so hard I swore everyone could hear it. I forced myself to keep speaking, telling stories about the man who had loved me more than anyone else ever had. I told them about his ridiculous laugh, the way he'd make up songs while doing the dishes, the way he always squeezed my hand twice, our secret code for "I love you." My voice wavered, but I pressed on, because if I didn't speak, who else would? No one else knew him the way I did. No one else chose him the way I had. And as I stood there, pouring out my heart, it struck me with brutal clarity. The very people who should have been my anchor in this storm had abandoned me. My parents. My sister. Even my so-called best friend. Their silence was louder than the organ music, heavier than the coffin itself. By the time I sat back down, my dress was damp with tears, my throat raw. I stared at the empty chairs where my family should have been, and a single thought burned in my mind: I will never forget this. Not for as long as I live. After the last handful of dirt thudded against Daniel's coffin, the mourners drifted away one by one, their footsteps crunching over the gravel path. The sun had started to sink, spilling a golden light that should have felt warm, but instead it just mocked me. I stood there long after everyone else had gone, my black heels sinking into the soft earth, staring at the grave marker that now bore my husband's name. My phone vibrated in my clutch, breaking the silence. I pulled it out with trembling fingers and froze. 22 missed calls. My screen lit up with names I knew by heart: Mom, Dad, Claire, my sister, and even Melissa, my so-called best friend. For a split second, hope fluttered in me. Maybe they had been delayed. Maybe something had happened. Maybe they were on their way now, desperate to explain why they hadn't walked through those church doors. I tapped the screen, but before I could call back, a notification banner slid across the top. Claire and James' engagement party popper, live now. My stomach dropped. I blinked at the words, unable to process them. My thumb moved almost of its own accord, opening the app. And there it was, a stream of photos and videos, already pouring in. My sister in a glittering white dress, holding up her diamond ring. My parents standing beside her, their faces glowing with pride. Melissa, my best friend since middle school, holding a glass of champagne, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. I felt like someone had driven a knife straight through my chest and twisted it. My husband's body wasn't even cold in the ground, and my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had chosen this. A party. A celebration. Glitter and champagne over grief and mourning. I scrolled, numb, through photo after photo. My father's arm around Claire's fiancé, as if he were the son he always wanted. My mother fussing over Claire's veil, like she was already rehearsing the wedding. Melissa, standing in the center of it all, holding up her champagne flute with the caption, "To love, to life, to new beginnings." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone against the ground and watch it shatter. Instead, I just stood there, my breath coming in short, painful bursts. The sounds of laughter echoed in my head, mixing with the memory of Daniel's favorite song that had played at the funeral earlier. Two worlds colliding, one drenched in sorrow, the other in joy, and I had been abandoned in the darker one. Tears blurred my vision until the images smeared together, but the pain was sharp, precise. This wasn't just absence. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a choice. They had weighed my grief against my sister's celebration, and they had decided I wasn't worth showing up for. The earth beneath my heels felt unsteady, as though the entire world had tilted against me. I whispered into the silence of the cemetery, my voice trembling but edged with steel, "I will never forgive this." By the time I made it home that evening, my mascara had dried in streaks down my cheeks. The house was suffocatingly quiet, every corner heavy with Daniel's absence. His shoes by the door. His jacket still hanging on the hook. I sank onto the couch, phone clutched in my hand, and stared at the long list of missed calls. Against every instinct screaming at me to ignore them, I pressed call back on my mother's number. She answered on the first ring. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "We tried to reach you all day." I sat up straighter, my voice trembling but sharp. "Where were you? Not one of you showed up for Daniel's funeral. Not you. Not Dad. Not Claire. Not even Melissa. Do you realize how humiliating that was?" There was a pause, just long enough to sting, and then my mother sighed, a long, patronizing sound. "Nina, your sister only gets engaged once. You'll have time to grieve, but her moment mattered more. You'll understand one day." I felt my stomach twist. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. Her moment. "Mom, I buried my husband today. He's never coming back. And you're telling me an engagement party is more important than his funeral?" My father's voice came faintly from the background. "Don't start drama, Nina. It's done." "Drama?" My voice cracked, louder this time. "Dad," I stood there alone. Not a single family member supported me. Do you know what that felt like? But the line went quiet, as if silence was easier for them than guilt. My mother muttered something about needing to check on guests and then hung up. Just like that. No apology. No acknowledgement. The room spun. I set the phone down and wrapped my arms around myself, rocking slightly. Their words carved into me like glass shards. Her moment mattered more. Don't start drama. It wasn't just today. The truth crashed into me like a wave. This had been happening my entire life. Birthdays as a child, forgotten because Claire had a school recital. My high school graduation, my parents leaving early because Claire had a sports banquet. The scholarship I worked 2 jobs to earn, brushed aside because Claire had just started dating some boy they adored. Every milestone, every achievement, every moment where I should have been seen, always overshadowed, always eclipsed. And Melissa, my so-called best friend. The one who used to promise me we'd always have each other's backs. She had chosen the party too. She hadn't just skipped the funeral, she'd stood at my sister's side, laughing, drinking, celebrating. I scrolled again through the photos, the captions, the comments. "So happy for you, Claire. The perfect couple. What a night to remember." Meanwhile, my night, my life, had been shattered. That was when it hit me with a clarity that stole my breath. Today wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was the truth, laid bare. To them, I had never mattered. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, not even as a friend. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was furious. The weeks after the funeral blurred together, a haze of sleepless nights and hollow mornings. I moved through the house like a ghost, my body going through the motions while my mind replayed the same scenes over and over. Daniel's final breath, the empty pews at the funeral, the sound of my mother's dismissive sigh. Grief, I realized, isn't a straight line. It's a storm that keeps circling back, hitting you from different angles. Some mornings I woke up reaching for Daniel's warmth beside me, only to find cold sheets. Other nights, I sat on the bathroom floor, clutching his shirt to my chest, breathing in the faint trace of his cologne until the fabric was damp with tears. But the worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the anger. The gnawing, bitter anger that chewed at me from the inside out. Every time I remembered my mother's words, her moment mattered more, my blood boiled. Every time I thought about Melissa raising a champagne glass instead of holding my hand, my teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. One evening, unable to stand the suffocating silence, I decided to start sorting through Daniel's things. His handwriting was everywhere. On sticky notes tucked into cookbooks, on scraps of paper he left in the garage, on envelopes where he doodled while talking on the phone. That's when I found them. A stack of worn journals, tucked into the back of his desk drawer. The covers were frayed, the edges softened from years of use. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. Page after page spilled out the inner world of the man I loved. His hopes, his fears, his quiet observations about life, about me, about us. And then I stumbled on an entry that made me stop breathing. Nina doesn't see her worth because her family never showed it to her. They treat her like she's invisible, but she's not. She's brilliant, she's kind, she's stronger than she knows. I just wish she could see herself through my eyes. One day she'll realize she doesn't need their approval. She'll stand on her own. My vision blurred, tears spilling down onto the page. I pressed my hand against the ink, as if I could touch him through the words. Daniel had seen what I'd been too blind, or too desperate, to admit. My family had been diminishing me for years, and I had let them. But he had believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. As I read entry after entry, a fire began to kindle inside me. Small at first, then hotter, sharper, unstoppable. For weeks, I had been drowning in grief, begging for scraps of love from people who had made it abundantly clear I meant nothing to them. Why was I still handing them that power? I wiped my tears and whispered into the silence, my voice steady for the first time since Daniel died. No more. You don't get to break me again. That was the moment the tide turned. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I was a woman ready to reclaim her worth, and I was going to make them regret ever underestimating me. Once the decision hardened in me, my grief no longer felt like quicksand. It became fuel. I stopped waiting for phone calls that would never come. Instead, I started digging into my family's carefully polished facade. The cracks were easy to find once I stopped looking at them as untouchable. My parents' vineyard estate, the pride of generations, wasn't the thriving empire they made it out to be. Quiet whispers from the town suggested late payments, suppliers cutting ties, and investors losing patience. They were stretched thin, pouring money into Claire's upcoming wedding as if it were a performance to prove their wealth hadn't dried up. I requested Daniel's lawyer to go over the remaining paperwork, thinking it would just be painful logistics. But the meeting changed everything. Sitting in that leather chair, I learned Daniel had left behind something I never knew existed. A trust fund, quietly built over years, meant solely for me. Nina, his lawyer said gently, sliding the folder across the desk, he wanted to make sure you'd never depend on anyone else. My hand shook as I read the numbers. For the first time in my life, I had resources, real power, that no one could take from me. My parents had stolen inheritance money years ago to finance Claire's lifestyle, convincing me there was nothing left. But Daniel had seen what I didn't. He had given me freedom. With that freedom came clarity. Their entire image, their wealth, their status, their control, depended on vendors, suppliers, and investors who could be swayed. And thanks to Daniel's foresight, I now had the means to quietly position myself in those very places. Piece by piece, I reached out. A supplier here. A vendor there. I bought influence where it mattered, always discreetly, always with the bigger picture in mind. I didn't need to destroy them in secret. I wanted the collapse to happen where it would sting the most, at Claire's wedding, in front of every guest, every investor, every friend they had ever tried to impress. And as the plan crystallized, I could almost hear Daniel's voice, steady and reassuring, in the back of my mind. You don't need their approval, Nina. Take back what's yours. The day of Claire's wedding dawned bright and clear, the vineyard bathed in golden sunlight. It was exactly the kind of picture-perfect backdrop my parents had always dreamed of. Rolling hills, white tents billowing in the breeze, champagne towers sparkling like liquid diamonds. Guests arrived in sleek cars, women in glittering gowns, men in tailored suits. Laughter drifted across the air, mingling with the clinking of glasses. I stood at a distance for a moment, taking it all in. The spectacle. The vanity. The same family who hadn't bothered to show up for Daniel's funeral was now parading themselves in front of 100 witnesses. But today, they didn't hold the strings. I did. Walking into the reception, every head turned. My dress was black, sharp, elegant, deliberate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's smile faltered when she saw me. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. You weren't invited, Claire hissed, her hand clutching the stem of her champagne glass so hard I thought it might snap. I smiled, calm and unhurried. No, but I'm not here as a guest. I raised my voice just enough for the nearest tables to hear. I'm here as the person who now controls every supplier this wedding depends on. The wine, the catering, the flowers, all of it. The murmurs started instantly, guests shifting uneasily in their seats. Investors and clients who had come expecting a flawless show leaned in, curious. Enjoy your drinks, I continued, because they're the last your vineyard will ever serve under your name. While you were busy celebrating, I was buying. And now, this entire empire you've built on stolen inheritance and lies. It belongs to me. Claire's face crumpled, her fiancé's smile evaporating as he glanced nervously at the crowd. My mother tried to shush me, pleading under her breath, "Don't do this, Nina, not here." But it was too late. The damage was done. The whispers spread like wildfire. Investors rose from their chairs, some already heading for the exits. The polished illusion my family had clung to for decades unraveled in minutes, right there under the perfect white tent. I stood tall, my pulse steady. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the overlooked sister, the quiet friend. I was the storm they never saw coming. The tent erupted into chaos. Guests whispered fiercely, pulling out phones, scrolling frantically through news articles I had ensured would publish the moment I spoke. Headlines confirmed every word: unpaid debts, inheritance theft, fraudulent bookkeeping. The glossy image of my parents' vineyard shattered like glass underfoot. Claire's fiancé backed away, his face pale as ash. You never told me any of this," he muttered, ripping off his boutonniere. Claire lunged for him, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her voice cracking into a desperate scream. "Don't you dare leave me. This is my day." But he was already gone, pushing past guests and slamming the door behind him. My father looked like someone had punched the air out of his chest. He tried to rally, puffing himself up. "This is slander. Lies. She's making this up." But the suppliers standing at the back shook their heads. One by one, they confirmed my claims, their voices clear, undeniable. My mother clasped her hands together, whispering, "Nina, please, not like this. We'll talk. We'll fix this." Her eyes darted around the room, desperate to salvage dignity, but there was none left to cling to. I took a slow step forward, heels clicking against the floor, each sound sharp as a gunshot. My voice was calm, steady, cutting through the panic. "Fix it. You can't fix what you chose to break. You abandoned me at Daniel's funeral. You stole from me. You erased me, over and over. Today isn't revenge. It's justice." The room went silent. My words hung in the air, heavy, final. I turned without waiting for their response. The guests parted like water as I walked through, heads bowed, whispers following me. Every step away from that tent felt like shedding a weight I had carried my entire life. Outside, the sunlight hit my face, warm and freeing. I inhaled deeply, a breath that felt like my first in years. For once, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had Daniel's faith in me, and now I had my own. I whispered into the breeze, almost like he was standing beside me. This was for you, Daniel. And for me. And with that, I walked away, leaving behind not just a ruined wedding but an entire family empire reduced to rubble. As I walked away from that wedding, I realized something I should have known long ago. Family isn't defined by blood. Blood had betrayed me, abandoned me, stolen from me. But love. Love stayed. Love was Daniel holding my hand through every storm. Love was me finding the strength he always believed I had. My parents thought I would stay silent forever, that I would bend, break, and still crawl back for scraps of affection. But grief has a way of reshaping you. It strips you raw, burns you down, and from the ashes rises something unshakable. I didn't ruin their empire. They did. I simply turned on the lights so everyone could see the cracks they had tried to plaster over with lies. Was revenge sweet? In some ways, yes. But what mattered more was reclaiming my voice, a voice they had tried to silence for decades. And when I spoke, the whole world listened. That was my justice. Not just making them fall, but finally choosing myself, loudly, unapologetically, and without regret. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And tell me in the comments, do you think Nina went too far, or did her family deserve every ounce of that downfall? I read every single comment and love hearing your takes. And of course, if you crave more powerful revenge stories filled with justice, betrayal, and redemption, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We drop new stories every week. Until next time, remember, karma never forgets.